Hello world, my name is Andy Silvers and today we're going to talk about OLED on mobile workstations. Alright, so today we're going to talk about OLED screen technology and mobile workstation laptops in particular, and we're going to look specifically at the HP ZBook Fury 16, the 2022 model. First, I want to note that I am an author, YouTuber, and filmmaker. I am currently not monetized on YouTube, so if you want to support the channel, obviously like and subscribe. However, it really helps me out when you check out my books. I have books for literally all ages, from ages 3 all the way up to adult. So check those out. They're going to be at the link in the video description. One is called The Very Colorful Caterpillar for ages 3 to 6. One is called Red Sprites and Blue Jets for ages 8 to 12. And the last one is called Solomon Grando versus the Jupiter Witch, which is for ages 16 and up. And that is a contemporary fantasy. So all these books are available at the link in the video description. It really helps me out, helps the channel out when you check them out. Alright, so let's talk about OLED screens in mobile workstations. So OLED screens are one of many different type of LED panel technologies that can be found in anything from TVs to monitors to laptop displays to smartphone displays. It's a really wide range of different display options, and I don't claim to be an expert in the technical details of all of them. However, I do have a general sense for the practical ramifications and real-world usage for most of them. So that is what we're going to talk about mostly today, and we're going to use the HP ZBook Fury 16 G9 as a primary example of this display technology and how I feel about it. So first off, LED stands for light emitting diode, and that refers to the actual illumination technology of the display panel. And OLED stands for organic light emitting diode, because organic phosphors, I believe it is, are actually used in the display in each pixel in order to produce the light that you see. But unlike an LED display, where typically you'll have several grid arrays of backlights effectively, maybe you'll have like a couple hundred of them perhaps, like maybe 380 of them, what you'll do is basically the backlight will be either on, or it'll be dim, or it'll be off. But the problem is that the pixels are not individually lit. In order to create black on one of those displays, light has to be blocked. So the light is still there and it's still shining through the display, but it's just that the light is being physically blocked. But it's not being blocked perfectly. So some of the light still gets through. Some of the light still sort of bleeds around the edges. And this is why the contrast ratio on LED displays is typically not as high as it could be. Now, technology has improved, and you can still get contrast ratios of up to like 1500 to 1 on higher end displays from like Dell, Lenovo, HP, etc. But it is difficult to do. OLED generally solves this problem because these displays have not an infinite contrast range like a lot of companies say, because in order for the contrast range to be infinite, it wouldn't be enough for just the sort of darkest darks to be off, or to be completely dark, it would have to be the brightest brights would also have to be extremely bright, like the sun, in order for you to really get that effect. But they're still very high. I've seen real-world contrast ratios on OLED displays going up to like sometimes 150 to 200,000 to 1. Which means that the bright spots are 200,000 times brighter than the dark spots, which is pretty impressive. And again, OLED displays have individually lit pixels. Every single pixel produces its own light, which means that if the display is showing a very dark either movie scene or image, for whatever reason, that is going to actually save a bit on battery life because you're not using as much power. But if you're displaying a Word document, like if you're an author, you're going to be using a lot more power to constantly keep every pixel fully illuminated. So OLED displays have a number of drawbacks and disadvantages that other forms of display technology do not. And personally, I'm a huge fan of upcoming display technologies like mini LED and in the distant future, micro LED. And yes, I know micro LED exists now, but it's not particularly consumer friendly or widely available. So mini LED is an extremely high-end, a high-quality form of LED display that doesn't technically use individually lit pixels, but it gets very close to that and can give you an extremely high contrast ratio and very high brightness, which is important, without necessarily having the downsides that come along with OLED, which includes a couple of things. Mostly it's burn-in on the screen, which I'll get to, but it's also, like I said earlier, battery life. If the OLED display is displaying a lot of white, like my screen is right now, then the battery life will be greatly reduced, and the power draw, of course, greatly increased. But obviously burn-in is the biggest problem. Burn-in is basically when the OLED pixels themselves start to decay. Remember, O stands for organic, which means it's using organic substances that don't have infinite lifespans. They do decay over time. Now, to be fair, any display can decay over time, but OLED has the unique problem of decaying a bit faster. And this occurs in particular when you have static image elements that don't move around on the screen a lot. So in Windows 10, this would be like the taskbar at the bottom of the screen. And if you open up the internet, this would be like the tabs in Chrome or whatever. And of course, if you're gaming, this would be like all the static UI elements on the game. If there's like a crosshairs in the center of the screen or whatever else might be on the screen and not move around a ton. Those elements have a tendency to burn in on any OLED display, really, from TVs to monitors to laptop displays and phones. And I've seen this personally at my workplace a lot. People who still rock the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S9 in particular will see OLED burn-in on their display, and it often takes the form of a pinkish color where you can see, for instance, the home screen icons. Even if they're not on the home screen, even if they're on YouTube, you can see sort of a faded image of the home screen icons. Now, obviously, technology is improving, and OLED is getting better, and also there are methodologies that companies are using to avoid burn-in. Like, for instance, for an always-on display on your phone, what will happen is, let's say the time is always there. Well, what will happen is the manufacturer, say Samsung, will make sure that the time moves up and down slowly throughout the day so that that timestamp is never in the same spot for too long. So that's one of many techniques and technologies that can be used to minimize OLED burn-in. And OLED burn-in can occur on PCs as well. It's also worth noting that there is a similar technology called AMOLED, which is often found in phones. AMOLED is basically the same as OLED, except it literally adds another layer. Basically a control layer that helps to control the light and color output, but it still uses OLED technology fundamentally and still suffers from the potential for burn-in. However, because of all this control over light and color, it actually can increase battery life a bit by draining less power. So that's why AMOLED displays are sometimes in laptops. I know Samsung does this, but I'm not aware of too many other companies that do. Anyway, HP, for their HP ZBook Fury 16 G9, is incorporating an OLED display into the laptop. The display is a 3840 by 2400 resolution 4K plus IPS display. It has wide viewing angles, low blue light, and it also has a high resolution and a 16 by 10 aspect ratio. I've made a video already covering the HP ZBook Fury 16, so you should absolutely check it out. In fact, I have two videos. One before the laptop was really released, and then another one after it became available. We had all the specs, and we could really cover it. So check both of those videos out. I will likely link them in the description. Now, OLED displays are extremely high quality and are very nice, but there are disadvantages to them, and not just disadvantages, but disadvantages that I think rear their ugly heads more commonly in like a mobile workstation use case. So I want to point out that this video is not really a review of a product so much as it's more of an editorial. So that means that if you disagree with me and you think that I'm mistaken, please let me know in the comments. Keep the comment section polite and cordial. But I'm not even really asserting that OLEDs are crap in this video. Instead, I'm saying that I don't think OLEDs are the best screen technology to use for mobile workstations like the HP ZBook lineup, because I think that the disadvantages outweigh the benefits. So the first disadvantage, of course, is burn-in, which I've already covered, but suffice it to say, if you're working in Blender or in CAD or any other software where you're going to have screen elements just static on screen for hours on end, that's going to increase the likelihood of burn-in, especially over time, which is not helpful. The other problem is that OLEDs, because of the companies, the panel manufacturers trying to avoid burn-in, they typically don't make them as bright. Now, in phones, they are often really bright. But in laptops and monitors, they are often not quite as bright. And we're seeing that here with the HP. So the HP ZBook Fury 16 has an OLED display with a maximum brightness of 400 nits. Now, 400 nits is actually a sizable amount of brightness and is going to look very good. However, I have literally owned a 400 nit display and a 600 nit display in the past 2 years, and I have personal experience with both. And I can tell you that 600 nits is noticeably brighter than 400. And you might think, why do I care? Well, if you're someone who wants to create content, especially film and media, a brighter display is actually going to be extremely beneficial to you. So the problem is that when you work with OLED displays, the blacks tend to be extremely black. And so depending on how you actually color correct and edit your film, it can actually look wildly different on different displays. So for instance, if you color correct the film using a high-end bright LED display, you might pull down the black levels to make them look, sort of contrasty on your screen. But if someone watches that media, whether it be a YouTube video, movie, TV show, commercial, music video, whatever, on their OLED display, those blacks may be completely lost. They may just go black and you can't see anything. So they might be wearing, say, a black jacket, but instead of looking like a black jacket, it looks like a black blob because of the way that the brightness values got transferred from the OLED display that they're watching it on as opposed to the LED display that you created it on. There are definitely encoding elements that can fix this, basically the way that HDMI signals work and the way that display signals work. There is some sense of this being addressed in, for instance, the HDR10 and 10 Plus workflows, like when the film editors send it out as opposed to when it gets put onto Blu-ray, for instance, as opposed to when it gets sent over the HDMI to the TV, as opposed to when the TV processes it. There's a lot of processing going on, and that processing fixes a lot of it, but you just have to be aware of it. The other thing to note is that OLED is actually great for content consumption, but not quite as much for content creation. So if you're watching a movie, yeah, OLED actually makes a lot of sense because the black levels will be very dark and the bright levels, while they won't be as bright as they could be, will still be probably bright enough. And if there are any black bars anywhere on the screen, whether it be the sides or the top and bottom, those black bars will effectively disappear because they'll be so pitch black that it will look really nice. But if you're creating content, this isn't really necessary. So if you're working in, say, ZBrush or Mudbox or some other advanced software, you don't really need all the dark parts of the image to go completely black. It's not really necessary. Instead, you want to be able to see what it is that you're doing in great detail to make sure that everything's looking proper. If you're color correcting a movie, then yes, you actually might want OLED in some cases, but on the flip side, you have to think about the bright parts of the image. If your peak brightness is 400 nits as opposed to mine, which is 600 on the previous version of the ZBook, you're not going to get quite as bright and vivid an image. So if the final image is going to be viewed on a high-end TV or even a movie screen, it's not going to look as good because you won't have actually color corrected the film to account for the extremely high brightness of the display. So everything will probably just end up looking darker than it should, even though it doesn't have to, because you won't have taken advantage of the extremely high sort of contrast and dynamic range available on that person's display. So for video editors, content creators, OLED can be nice, but it's not always ideal. So HP, as you have heard, is using a 400 nit OLED display on the newest ZBooks. However, Apple is not. Apple is actually using mini LED displays for some of their higher-end MacBook Pros and, of course, their Pro Display XDR. Mini LED doesn't have the same drawbacks as OLED other than just taking up quite a bit of power. But besides that, it has a lot of the high contrast advantages of OLED without the drawbacks of burn-in, and you can really go high with the maximum brightness. This is something that HP has not integrated into any other laptops that I'm aware of, but it's something that they can do in the future, and I would personally prefer over OLED or AMOLED displays, particularly for content creation devices. I think that OLED almost comes across like a stopgap solution. It almost feels like OLED is a great technology that was good for a while until mini LED and potentially micro LED displays become widely available and cost effective. Because again, those displays, while they do have high power draw, don't have too many other disadvantages. Yes, they're expensive, but of course, with every technology, the cost will go down. And I think that micro and mini LED have a much brighter, pun intended, future than OLED does for the most part, for most markets. OLED is extremely valuable in phones, though, and I think it will be for the foreseeable future because OLED displays can be extremely thin, which is required for smartphones unless you want the smartphone to be half an inch thick. But for laptops, desktops, monitors, TVs, well, desktop displays, it is not necessary to have the display be that razor thin. No one's really going to care about it because you're not holding the display in your hand. So in that case, I think that having the OLED screen be phased out in favor of micro LED, mini LED technology is generally preferable. But what do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Let's have a positive and uplifting conversation about it. I genuinely want to know what you think. And please check out my books. There are books right now for all ages, and I have a new one in the works, a new adult contemporary drama. It really helps me out, helps support the channel and content like this, and I'll see you in the next video.